Look, you and I expected the video to show police brutality, and it did. It was police brutality. No one is in favor of this. No one supports this. It should be condemned. It should be prosecuted. It makes cops' jobs harder. But cops, there's hundreds, I think there's 700,000 plus sworn law enforcement officers in this country. There are going to be a handful within that, almost a million who are bad people who do bad things or who cross the line or who in a moment of rage or whatever have a failing that is unacceptable and needs to be criminally prosecuted.
Good news to start on Monday. There were significantly no riots of consequence in the wake of the Tyre Nichols video release around 6 p.m. Central on Friday evening across the country. I know there were some small scattered flare-ups, but by and large, everything remained, for the most part, peaceful. And that is a very good thing because the fear was that once more the summer of 2020 rioting would unspool across the nation. Now, Buck, what I would argue here is that's because ultimately Black Lives Matter only gets angry when Black lives are impacted and white people are involved in those lives being taken. And therefore, it's really not Black Lives Matter. It's Black Lives Matter in the parenthetical when white people are involved in Black death. Because when the video came out, this video to me was far worse, and the videos, I should say, of these 5 police officers in Memphis, what they did to Tyre Nichols was far worse to me than what happened to George Floyd on video. And if you consider that while you might be upset about George Floyd's interaction with the police and the way it went and believe it was criminal, as it has been proven to be, there was a reason police were called because George Floyd was trying to pass a counterfeit bill and he was also on drugs. So police were specifically requested. In this situation with Tyre Nichols, there does not seem to have been, Buck, any reason for the initial police stop to have taken place. And all of the violence that ensued since, to me, is far worse than what we saw happen to George Floyd. Yet, and I would submit this is the reason, because it was 5 black police officers, there was virtually no riot. The media has tried to argue, and will play, CNN, MSNBC, the like, have tried to argue, oh, this is still an example of white supremacy, but most people just simply don't believe it. And so it's a positive sign that there was no rioting, pillaging, looting, so to speak, Buck. But also this just further epitomizes, because the video was as bad or worse than I anticipated it was going to be, that really they can only mobilize when there are white people that are involved in misbehavior or potential criminal allegations.
I think we should have the discussion about police and policing now, that they always say now is the time for reform, or now is the time to do something about law enforcement. Let's look at the reality of law enforcement in Memphis right now. Let's understand what's actually going on. As we said last Friday before the video was out, before we had seen it, because the show ended prior to the release, they wanted to get rid of this Scorpion unit. That was the initial call. So they're focusing in on an anti-violent crime unit in the Memphis PD. What's the reality of the Memphis Police Department in recent years? It has a very hard time getting people to sign up to want to be cops in Memphis. So hard that, in fact, the Memphis Police Department, in a less brutality, more diversity initiative, by the way, decided that they were going to change standards dramatically for who could be a police officer in Memphis. They even were willing to give felony waivers. That has been confirmed. New York Post had this up. Felony waivers for cops. Oh, you're convicted of a felony? Well, we really need cops in Memphis right now because nobody wants to sign up for this. I mean, they were giving $15,000 bonus up front. They waived that you had to have even an associate's degree if you just had a few years of work experience. They're desperate for cops. Why are they desperate for cops in a city like Memphis? Well, let's take a moment, shall we? If you're a law enforcement officer in the last few years in this country, in a high crime area where a lot of the crime is disproportionately, committed by minorities, if you're in that community, do you feel like you're going to be backed up when things get rough as a law enforcement officer? No, you don't. So very few people will go up to sign up. The kind of people that you want to sign up aren't doing it. And so what you have is a lowering of standards, and then a tragic incident like this occurs, and they say, you know what we should do? Let's ban more police units. Let's blame the cops even more instead of looking at these cops did something bad. What's going on structurally within the police department overall? I mean, to talk about a difference in training, okay, here's one thing. Very noticeable, Clay. A lot of people pointed this out. I think they said there were 71 commands given over the course of the video. I wrote in 2017 about an incident in Mesa, Arizona with a man named Daniel Shaver. Daniel, this was all on video. And I remember I was very upset by this case because a white cop with a rifle, in my opinion, executed a guy in obviously.
That video is up for people who have not seen it. It's very difficult to watch. I
mean, this guy is, and the victim here was white. The cop was charged with murder. A jury, inexplicably, in my mind, let the cop off. But because the whole thing hinged on whether or not Daniel Shaver was complying. Well, first of all, he did absolutely nothing wrong. He had a BB gun in his hotel room, which he was legally allowed to have. Someone called the cops. The cops came into the hallway. The guy who shot him had etched into his AR-15, you're dead or you're going to die. I mean, the guy's not somebody you want to be a police officer, obviously. And he starts barking commands like, put your hands behind your head, put your feet together, crawl toward me, keep your hand. I mean, if you didn't have a gun pointed at you, you wouldn't be able to do this. It'd be hard to follow. You wouldn't be able to follow. You'd be like, what are you talking about? The guy's, but then it's, he's not obeying commands. And he just shoots the guy. I mean, It's an execution. It's on video. But he's white and the victim's white. So, Clay, was there national outrage about it? I wrote about it at thehill.com at the time. The story went viral, but was there a big conversation about it at CNN? No, because there wasn't a racial angle. Well, guess what? Looking at commands that police officers give and the training they're in might actually be a really useful thing. Might have actually prevented some tragic incidents later on, but didn't get the attention it needed. So if you want to talk about training right now, what are the protocols? I mean, when they're telling Tyre Nichols, for example, comply, and he is, it looks like, complying.
Attempting to comply,
He's trying to comply. Cops need to know the second that someone is complying and you're shouting comply and hitting him, you are engaging in police brutality. But, I have never even heard the comply discussion at the national level about meaning how cops should be trained to escalate through that process and not say, you're not doing what I want, so now I'm going to beat you or even shoot you. But instead, it's always get rid of the unit, it's racism, the usual thing.
Buck, over half of the Memphis police force is black. All 5 of these officers that were charged with murder are black. Yet there has been a desperate attempt to try to tie this to white supremacy, which just hasn't worked. And, it's gone across the board. I mean, we've got audio here from a couple of these different guys that I thought would make sense. But the thing that I would say for all of you out there to think about is we've lost on the left wing. They have lost the ability to analyze individual decisions and hold individuals responsible for the choices that they make, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whoever you are. Ultimately, we are all responsible for our own individual decisions. And Eric Adams says, who's a former police captain, says racism was involved in the beating of Tyre Nichols to death Let's play cut 4.
Chief C.J. Davis, in my interview with her, she said that all the officers being black, it takes race off the table. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think that I understand what the chief was saying, and I think she really handled this situation in a very professional way. She moved swiftly. She ensured that those officers were removed from the department. She took all the necessary steps. But I think race is still on the table. When a culture of policing historically has treated those from different groups differently, even when the individuals are from that same group, that culture can still exist. And we have to zero in on it, being honest about it, and making sure that we properly train police for the realities of the cities that they are policing in.
Okay, so Eric Adams wants to run for president potentially in 2024, and he's arguing that race is involved in this case. When you hear that, Buck, what do you think?
His analysis is nonsense. His analysis is what the left and the Democrats want to hear in this moment. Look, you and I expected the video to show police brutality, and it did. It was police brutality. No one is in favor of this. No one supports this. It should be condemned. It should be prosecuted. It makes cops' jobs harder. But cops, there's hundreds, I think there's 700,000 plus sworn law enforcement officers in this country. There are going to be a handful within that, almost a million who are bad people who do bad things, or who cross the line, or who in a moment of rage or whatever have a failing that is unacceptable and needs to be criminally prosecuted. And I just think that, when they say things like this, I just sent to Allie. I mean, I know it's an older story, but I mentioned this. We'll put it up at clayandbuck.com. A link to the video and the analysis I did at the time. This was 2017 now, going back 6 years, Clay, of the Daniel Shaver incident. Every time something like this happens, and it happens to be involving a black man, does not mean that it is racism. This also happens to non-black individuals in this country. Daniel Shaver was one of them. And I would argue, the Daniel Shaver incident was as bad as this, actually. Both individuals died, but Daniel Shaver, I mean, there was no, it was lethal force used in an incident where there absolutely should not have been. This is not whataboutism. It's just contextualization of this stuff happens, and to always make it about race when there's obviously no clear correlation, there's no clear race angle, does a disservice to the conversation we're supposed to have about how, one, what does justice look like for his family, and two, what can we do now?
75% of people who are shot by police are white, Asian, or Hispanic. 75%. You never hear about any of those incidents. By the way, most people who are shot by police are violent felons who are engaging in violent behavior. But sometimes police fail.
That they've buried it, but there was a study done by a Harvard economist a few years back about who is more likely when they control for the kind of incident you're talking about. Is it more likely that cops will shoot a white individual or a black individual in a police-involved incident with similar circumstances? And the economists found that it was clear that the cops are actually more likely to shoot a white individual. And the thesis was because they know if they shoot an individual who's black and the circumstances are murky at all, or it's a close call at all, their life is ruined. They may go to prison the rest of their lives.
On your comment today, we're moving. I don't know how you did it with Rodney. I know Tyre's dad was devastated.
Yes, sir.
I know people say that too, but I do know. I lost my son in a war, the consequences of the war in Iraq being there a year, and I lost my daughter when a tractor trailer broadside and killed my wife and daughter. And I don't know how you stood there. I didn't have the courage to do what you did.
So that was President Biden speaking to Tyre Nichols' parents. And it is true, Biden has suffered a lot of personal tragedy. But I have to just point out once again that he is in a habit, and in more than one instance and on more than one occasion, of lying about his personal tragedy, Biden's personal tragedy, for political gain or for some connection. He keeps saying, I lost my son in a war, a consequence of the war. Biden is not a Gold Star father. Biden did not lose his son in a war. His son, Bo, tragically died of cancer. It is very sad. It is tragic, and it is a tremendous loss, and that is obviously the case. But Clay, it just strikes me as bizarre. I mean, even Biden caught himself and said, "Oh, a consequence of the war in Iraq," which is also, by the way, that's just some theory that there's no actual science to prove that connection whatsoever. You just think in that moment, can Biden in that deeply human moment of connecting with another family after the loss of their son, why does he feel the need to embellish or tell this story once again that everyone says is just not true?
It's a great question, and it's the same story that is also tragic associated with his wife and daughter's death when he got photographed being sworn in their hospital room. And the story is tragic enough. If you're a parent and you lose a child to cancer, I do think that Biden could talk to other parents about grief and loss and the impact of that upon them. But he feels the need constantly to spread lies about where and how his son died. And it's uncomfortable. And even when he's pointed out to be doing it, he continues to do it time after time.
I just think Biden lies. He lies so much that he barely even notices. And even in a moment of the most profound human connection, he still feels the need to lie, which I just think it's a compulsion with him at this point.
They're trying to run back the defund the police slogan, even though it has been roundly criticized, and Democrats are now trying to say, well, we never really said that we wanted to defund the police. Hasan, how do you pronounce his name? Mehdi Hasan, I think.
Mehdi Hasan, yep.
Mehdi Hasan on MSNBC says he's tired of Democrats running away from talk of abolishing and defunding the police. Here he is. You knew it was going to happen. Listen.
The issue here, as plenty of people have pointed out, is not black versus white. It's blue versus the rest of us, which is why this whole reform nonsense from Democrats is so tiring and so dishonest. You can't reform this stuff with body cameras or diversifying the police, as we just saw in Memphis. That doesn't solve the problem either. Now, Democrats, of course, want to run away from talk of abolishing the police or even defunding the police. That's way too radical, way too out there. But consider this. The Memphis Police Department's response to all this controversy and camera footage on Saturday was to announce that it was disbanding the specialized police unit whose officers inflicted that brutal assault on Tyre Nichols, the so-called Scorpion unit. Yeah, they defunded and abolished it.
It's true. They did do that. And
did you hear what he's pushing for, though? I mean, this is what the left really wants.
Yeah, no, that's
abolition of police,
yes.
Folks. These people are lunatics. Just understand that the people that are making the most noise on the left about this, first of all, they never line up. Okay, what is the more urgent problem in this nation right now to deal with? What is the more systemic problem in this nation right now? The massive increase in homicides over the last 3 years, over an already, depending on the country you're comparing us to, pretty high homicide rate, or the very fortunately rare but still gut-wrenching and awful instance of lethal police brutality that occurs a few times a year. They're both problems. One of them, thousands of people are dying.
Yes.
Thousands and thousands of people are dying. Children are dying. They're being shot in the crossfire. So to treat all law enforcement like, I mean, this guy's basically saying, oh, look at these cops. They were, they're terrible. They brutalized Tyre Nichols, which is true. Let's get rid of all cops. Abolish police. That just means more people are going to die.
No doubt. You use a viral anecdote to demand a prescription that is going to lead to a far worse outcome than what we've already had. Now, a lot of cops, but I think it's important to play that cut because almost immediately as crime rates skyrocketed in the wake of the defund the police movement, what ended up happening was Democrats said, oh, we never, ever called for defund the police. And we brought you the receipts. We played them all saying it. But it only took one viral police incident of misbehavior for that entire argument of defund the police and taking the next step of abolish police to come back.